Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Samuel, that's Shmuel Bet, with chapter 21, that is Perek Chaf Aleph. And as we read this chapter, we will have a little bit of a summary at the end of some other battles and events that occurred during David's reign. But it starts with an incident which it's not clear exactly when during the history of David's reign this incident took place. One gets the sense and the feel that this is kind of a chapter like wrapping things up by telling us about a few certain instances. I do want to mention, though, it's important in the context. The first story that we're going to read about is extremely disturbing and difficult to read. But it's not as if we haven't read other disturbing things in this book. But here's one of the most disturbing ones. But I think in order to understand it and mitigate a tiny bit some of the difficulty, we have to understand some of the context. We are reading about this after we read about the revolts of Avshalom. And one of the undercurrents during the revolts of Avshalom and the other revolts that we have read about, was the fact that the descendants of Saul were, it's either there were suspicions that they might be involved in trying to regain the monarchy. There was suspicions that other people would want to put them back into the monarchy. There was always rumblings. And one who's familiar with the way kings in those days in general worked, they usually would kill off all of the remnants of the family of the previous monarch in order to prevent them from ever trying to stage a comeback. And David didn't do that. As we know, David made a special promise to Saul and Jonathan not to allow their descendants to be killed, and that he would support them, which he did, which we read about extensively in the previous chapters. But understanding that might help us put this story in a little bit of perspective, although it's not exactly, it's still going to be disturbing. So, Vayihira of Bimei David, there was a hunger, a famine, during the times of David, Shalosh Shanim, Shana Acharei Shana, for 3 years, year after year. Now, most of the time we assume that a famine is a result of a lack of rain. Interestingly, it never says in this story, despite when you read the commentaries, and almost everyone understood this, as it wasn't raining, and then David prayed to God, and the event that we're going to read about happened, and then God gave rain. But it doesn't say anything really about it. There is a mention of rain, but not God ending this famine by giving rain. I want to make a suggestion here that also might mitigate this a little bit, and it comes from the rationalist side of me, that we often take what is sometimes a Maimonidean approach of minimizing the miracles and remembering that famine can result from other things, and there may actually have been less rain, but if we recall the Givonim, whom we're about to read about, the people who pretended that they were a faraway tribe, but they were really locals, and they tricked the people of Israel, and this goes back to Joshua chapter 9, and they were made into the water carriers and the shoavei mayim, the water drawers, and the choppers of wood. I would like to posit that part of this hunger, at least one of the reasons why they had a hard time dealing with the difficult times, it might have been climactic, was, because of a difficult climate, was because the Givonim weren't cooperating, and they weren't doing their job of drawing water and chopping wood, which was necessary for building whatever implements they needed. So because of that, this was making the hunger worse. But here, Vayevakesh David et Pnei Adonai, David searched and cried to God, to find a solution to this crisis. Vayomer Adonai, and God said, El Shaol v'el Beit HaTomim, hadomim asher al asher himit et hagivonim. And God said the reason why there's a problem here is because of Saul and what Saul had done in his murderous household, because he killed off the Givonim, or at least he committed some sort of a massacre against the Givonim people. And these people were basically the servant class, and apparently Saul had tried to, or had actually killed many of them, and because of this, there's a mess. In other words, so the people, the Givonim, in the way I'm reading this story, had a gripe against Saul, right, obviously for reasons. Now, we haven't learned, when we read of Saul's monarchy, the verses didn't tell us about this massacre, but here it's telling us that it did happen in the past. And therefore, the Givonim didn't cooperate and didn't help and weren't doing their job. Now, Vayikra HaMelech LaGivonim. So the king called to the Givonim, Vayomer Aleim, and he said to them, V'haGivonim lo mibnei Yisrael hema. And here's like a parenthesis here. And by the way, remember, the verse says, the Givonim were not from the people, the children of Israel. Ki miyeter ha'Amori. They are from the remaining tribes that are still surviving from the Amorites. Uvnei Yisrael nishbu'u lahem, and the people of Israel swore to them, they made an agreement not to harm them, in the days of Joshua, Vayivakesh Shaul HaKosam. But Saul didn't like them around for whatever reason. Maybe he felt they were corrupting the people. Who knows? Whatever the reason, we really don't know. And Saul wanted to kill them. In his wrath over his zeal over the people of Israel and Judah. So Saul wanted to get rid of them, and he killed many of them. So understandably, the people of the Givonim. Now, in my reading here, if one imagines that Saul killed many of the Givonim, so the people of the Givonim hated Saul, then the Givonim would have very much liked David, right? And the Givonim of all people would have been very upset that David was allowing many of the descendants of Saul to live, which gives us a little bit more context here. So Vayomer David el HaGivonim. So David said to the Givonim, Ma e'eselochem. What should I do for you? Uvamo echaper. And how can I get forgiveness, or expiate the sin, uvarchu et nachalat Adonai, so that you can bless the people of God, the people that are the inheritance of God. So David comes to the Givonim and says, what can I do that you guys can cooperate? What can I do to get you guys back on our side? So Vayomer lo, and assume in general, what he means is, can I pay you off, right? Vayomer lo HaGivonim, the Givonim said to them, Ein lanu kesef v'zahovim sholvim beiso. We're not interested in getting property and silver and gold from Saul and from his household. Ve'ein lanu ish lahamis b'Yisrael. And we're not interested in killing any of the other people in Israel. We don't have a vengeance against you. Our gripe is not against the other people. Vayomer ma atem omrim eselachem. So he said, if that's the case, then tell me what it is. Whatever it is, I'll do. David said, Vayomer l'melech. They said to the king, Ha'ish asher kilanu, the man who killed us, v'asher dima lanu, and was planned to kill us, to destroy us, to exterminate us. Nishmadnu mehityasev b'chol gvul Yisrael, right? We want to stop him from existing. We want to stop his remnant from existing from among all of Israel. Yutan lanu shiva anashim, give us 7 men, mibanav, of his children, v'hokanum ladonai, and let us impale them before God, b'givat Shaol, and let's do that in Givat Shaol, which is the place where Saul was from, where he lived, b'chir Adonai, the Saul who was chosen of God. Vayomer hamelech ani atein, and the king said, I will give them over to you. Now this is extremely vengeful, extremely difficult, and this is what was so disturbing that I was mentioning before about this story. These 7 people are presumably innocent. They just happen to be descendants of Saul. There's another difficulty, and that is that we learned before that when David looked for the remnants of Saul, he only found Mephibosheth. So where did these all of a sudden come from? Which is another issue here. But apparently there were other ones. Maybe this story happened before David looked for remnants of Saul. And maybe the reason for the placement of this story is here because it's only after all these rebellions, right, that we can understand some little bit of a justification on David's part for allowing such a horrific murder to happen. Because ultimately, when all is said and done, David himself understood as well that with so many remnants of Saul's family, that he would that it could be a challenge to the unity of the kingdom in the future. So vayachmol hamelach al Mephibosheth ben Yonatan ben Shaul. However, the king did have mercy on Mephibosheth, who was the son of Jonathan, al shvuat Adonai asher beinotam, because he swore to God, right, ben David ben Yonatan ben Shaul, between David and Jonathan. David made a swore that he would watch over the kids. So Mephibosheth he kept alive, but not these. The king took, excuse me, the two sons of Ritzpah, the daughter of Ayah, who was one of Saul's wives, Es Armoni ve'es Mephibosheth, another one who had the same name, Mephibosheth, V'chameshet b'nei Michal bat Shaul, and the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul. Now, we had learned that Michal did not have any children. It could have meant that Michal had these 5 children from the previous husband, the one that Saul gave Michal to before Michal returned back to David. Or it could be, as the rabbis understood, that these weren't actually the sons of Michal, but they were called the sons of Michal, Asher Yolda Adriel ben Barzilai HaMecholati, that were born to Adriel, who was actually not Michal's husband, but it was actually Merab's husband, the other, Merab's husband, the other daughter of Saul. So it could be that Michal raised them, and that's why they're called that, and that's the rabbinic tradition here. So there's a lot of unanswered and unclear questions in this verse, but the bottom line is there were 7 sons besides the Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, who David spared. There were 7 sons, and he handed them over. Vayitnem biyad Givonim, he handed them over to the Givonim. Vayokium b'har lifnei Adonai, and they were impaled on the mountain before God. What does that mean, before God? One would imagine that maybe it means that that they had some sort of a ceremony, or maybe even had an animal sacrifice before God when they did this. So it's pretty gruesome. Vayiplu shivatam yochad, and all 7 of them died at the same time. Vehemohumsu b'mei k'tzib rishonim, and they were killed in the early days of the harvest. B'tchilat k'tir se'orim. So this is the springtime, in the beginning of the barley harvest. Vatikach Ritzpah bat Ayah. So Ritzpah, the daughter of Ayah, etasak. So this is the mother of 2 of the 7. She took a sackcloth, vatateu la alatzur mitchilat katzir, and she spread it on a rock in the beginning of that season, ad nitach mayim aleim min hashamayim, until it came time for the rainy season, which is in the fall, or much later, but it's about 5-6 months later, in the fall, early winter time. And she did not allow the birds to land on their bodies during the day. And she protected them against scavenging animals during the night, protecting and respecting these bodies. And it was told to David that which Ritzpah, the daughter of Ayah, who was Saul's concubine, had done in respect to this body. And David realized that this the reason for this verse leads us to recognize why David would then do what he's about to do in the next verse, which is verse 12, because then he realized, you know what, this is a sign I should be respecting Saul's legacy in the sense of giving respect to the bones and the bodies of those who had passed on from Saul's family, in order to respect them and dead, and give them an honorable burial fitting for a past king and his family. Vayelech David. So David went, vayikach et atzmot Shaul v'atzmot Yonatan beno. He took the bones, the remains of Saul and the remains of Jonathan, me'et baalei Yavesh Gilad, from the people that lived in Yavesh Gilad. Remember, they, Asher Gonvu Otam, we read this story in the end of the first book of Samuel, they had stole them a Rechov Beit Shan, from the streets of Beit Shan, Asher tlo'um shama plishtim, which is where the Philistines who had killed them in battle had hung them in order to make fun of them, in order to so the people of Yavesh Gilad who were loyal to Saul took the bodies and brought them there. And that happened after the battle where Saul died at the hands of the Philistines in Gilboa, in the mountain of Gilboa. So David went to Yavesh Gilad, vayal misham et atzmos Shaol, and he took the bones of Saul, v'et atzmot Yehonasam beno, vaya'asu et atzmot hamukaim, and he also took the bones of those that had been impaled. Vayikberu et atzmot Shaol v'Yonatan beno, and he buried them be'eretz Binyamin, in the land of Benjamin, which is where they belong. That was their tribe, that was their family. Batsela, in a place called Selah, bekever Kish Aviv, in the family plot where Kish, Saul's father, was buried. Vaya'asu kol asher tziva hamelach, and they did everything which the king had commanded, right? And Vaye'oter Elohim la'aretz achrei kain, and God then listened to the land after that. Remember, it does not say he made it rain, because there was never any mention of there having been a lack of rain. It just says God listened to them after that. And this Vaya'asu kol asher tziva hamelach is unclear what it means. It's assumed that it means those that David asked to get the bones, but it would be weird because it said in the previous verse, Vayal misham atzmot Shaol, he took from there atzmot Shaol. So I'm going to pause it here, and I'm not aware of others that explain it this way, but I think this verse, Vaya'asu, and they did that which the king commanded, means they, the Givonim, now cooperated with the people, and now that that was working, they were able to get out of this state of difficulty, this state of hunger, now that they had their water drawers and their builders and their collectors of wood back to work with them. The society was able to get back on its feet. I know this is a bit of a novel interpretation, but it would make sense. This is the way I understand this episode. Nonetheless, it's gruesome, it's difficult, but it's what happened. So Vatihi od milchama. This would actually be a good place to stop, and we can finish the next couple of stories in the upcoming podcast 21b, and then finish this chapter. Thank you so much for studying together. Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to studying the rest of this chapter and the rest of the book of Samuel together.